Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Cryptid and Monsters video. I thought I would continue the theme associated with some of my past videos, and that is talking about some of the scary and creepy encounters that people have had with skinwalkers. My past videos have gotten a good number of views, some good likes, lots of people making comments as well, and I'm still having a lot of fun talking about these videos, so I thought why not? Let's go ahead and let's share another particular video here. In this case, we're going to focus on 3 scary encounters that people have had with skinwalkers. And as always, I'm going to give my comments on it as well. And then I'd love to hear what your comments are too with regards to each story. These come from a website that doesn't necessarily showcase who they're with, the titles, and then what links associated with them. So I'm just going to present them as is. But otherwise, let's go ahead and let's start this video here once again, talking about 3 scary and creepy encounters that people have had with skinwalkers. This is the very first one here, and here's how the user states. My family and I spent close to a decade on the Navajo Reservation of northern Arizona. Perhaps that is where my love of the paranormal began. There is some kind of tangible magic amongst a group of people connected to the earth in a way I feel the majority of white folk have forgotten. Spending my formative years amongst the Navajo, Hopi, and Apache, I found a respect for the older ways, for the importance of legend in our everyday lives, and why having a clan and tribe meant something I, as a white child, could appreciate but never truly understand. The story I tell you is not out of a desire to get a reaction, but to share a beautiful experience and perhaps provoke a respect for what we so casually label as monsters. I grew up in an incredibly abusive home. My mother was a wreck. My guardian/grandmother worked for the tribal school system, and when she was actually home, which was rare, she was either berating us or beating us to the point of blisters, bruises, and welts. Life within our home was rough. As a result, we 7 children didn't spend much time at home, and the others got into trouble provoking gangs, experimenting with drugs, or throwing themselves into sports to get away as much as possible. I didn't do any of these things. I made friends with every child I met. Their families welcomed me in, and I wandered from home to home until dark. Some of the elderly people of the tiny town seemed to take me in, telling me stories and teaching me the language which was still somewhat common in those days. Some parents snuck me into council meetings, and though I was very young, 4 years old, I distinctly remember the council members smiling as they told the parents they couldn't have me there for fear of angering others, and the older children taking me down to a creek nearby to play. Now, my time on the reservation is still a fond memory for me. I was taken care of and loved there. I was different, and they could easily have alienated me for it, but they did the opposite. All of us were poor. The town was dilapidated and had few of the comforts Americans usually enjoy, and yet it had everything I wanted as a young child. Adventure in the wilderness that I explored often, good people, excellent friends, and stories that set my imagination running. For many years, I thought I had never seen or experienced a skinwalker. Now I realize I have, only it didn't frighten me as did my brothers. It actually watched me. So my brothers spoke of being threatened by peers with skinwalkers just waiting for a reason to chase us off their land. One of my brothers came home late one night to find a coyote on its hind legs staring into our kitchen, its paw on the doorknob. He was crying when he told me the story, shaking with fear. I'd seen plenty of coyotes, but I've never been scared of them. I didn't understand why it was a cause for concern. I was far more frightened of the packs of stray dogs that ran around town. They'd attack if you ran, and sometimes they'd follow you all the way home growling. To this day, I can't see a blue heeler without wanting to run. I do remember attending a fair, coming through the town on a school field trip. My teacher, who I loved, made me hold her hand for some reason she couldn't explain, and I remember her talking to the aide about getting the children onto the bus before we were seen. A man painted gray and black came to the bus and started looking into the windows. My kindergarten teacher shoved me down under the seat, holding my head so that I couldn't get up or peek. And I still remember the other kids laughing, my teacher looking at me, and there was no humor in her face as she yelled at the man to leave. She looked frightened. So throughout all these experiences, I still spent more time outside, unsupervised, than a child my age ever should have. And during that time, I noticed a gnarly-looking eagle everywhere I went. It was dark brown and large, with a wickedly curved beak and claws. To a child, it was almost daunting, but I began talking to it. Every time I saw it soaring overhead or sitting atop a street post or in a tree, I would pour out my little soul to this poor animal. I told it everything, my fears, what was happening at home, my school lessons, new Navajo words I'd learned and things I found funny. Once or twice, I could have sworn I heard laughing in my head, echoing as if it came from somewhere far off. It cocked its head at me a few times, making me feel like maybe it understood, and I still see it occasionally, and I smile and wave every time I do. I believe maybe I'm seeing a skinwalker, but it wasn't the blood-thirsty monster that people describe. And then that's it. That's everything that this user had to mention in their story. So lots of good information to talk about here. Once again, it's involving another reservation, in other words, the Navajo reservation, but this time in northern Arizona. And here you're dealing with someone that considers himself an outsider. In their case, because they're white, they're thinking as such in this middle of the reservation, especially when they were starting to focus on all the kids, the way they made him feel like an outsider, the way they were almost bullying him, and so on, the way the teacher also treated him in a nice way, but still differently than some of the other peers there. Interesting, though, the twist associated with this story. Here, the skinwalkers, if there were two of them, were good, if you could even call it that. One was that encounter that the brother had, where they saw that coyote on its hind legs peering into the window with one of those paws on the actual knob itself. So it didn't do anything. It was just peering in. Definitely freaked out the brother. But again, for the main user, for the main narrator, it did not. And then the second one was different. It wasn't a coyote or another dog, as is usually mentioned in these stories, but rather what this author thought was a bird. In this case, some other type of bird, something there just standing, almost following him, let's say from point A to point B, or at least he considered it to be an eagle, and then he was actually communicating with it. Isn't that interesting? It was like almost this thing, whatever it was there, just watching over him, but not doing anything. Makes you wonder, makes you pause and see and think, like, what's happening in this situation? If that truly was a skinwalker, then why was it essentially following this quote-unquote outsider, but deciding not to do anything bad? If even that, it was almost like it was being patient with the boy as the boy was walking around and explaining all these stories to it. Definitely some stuff to consider. I'd love to hear what your comments are with regards to that. Next story that I'm going to talk about is this one. Here's what this user had to say. So I've been waiting a relatively long while to post this just because I'm still freaked out by the fact that this actually happened. Rewind 2 weeks and it's the 4th of July. A few of my friends want to actually do something instead of just lounge in front of our computers like we do every day. There were 5 of us, which was me, Neil, Elijah, JD, and then Neil's sister, Katie. Neil had the idea to go to his grandparents' house as they owned a farmhouse. We live in Texas, so having that much space, especially with other houses being half a mile out, it was the perfect place to pop fireworks without getting into much trouble. The drive from where we lived to their house was about a 40-mile drive. Unfortunately, the only car we had our hands was a 2-door, so trying to fit the 5 of us into one car was hectic, to say the least. The drive was actually tolerable. Three of my friends in the back found a comfortable yet funny position to sit in, in the car, and the music Katie was playing was helping a lot and definitely passed the time. We all bought some fireworks halfway there, and my friends jumped back into their designated position for about another 20 miles. And as we got there, Neil forgot to mention that his grandparents were out of town for the week, which made the experience ahead of us even better. All of us got out of the car except for Katie, who suggested that she get us all food and sodas for the night. She kept the fireworks in the back because she didn't want us popping any while she was gone, and she drove off, and all of us were left without fireworks, so we did the next best thing and went to the pool in the back. Something that already put me off was that the ranch sat considerably close to a forest. Neil even went the extra step to tell me that there's the occasional wolf that can be a hassle to deal with. Of course, I got nervous because I had nothing to defend myself with if one jumped over the fence. He handed me his pocket knife, saying that there's a shotgun in the living room if something goes down. He mentioned that he was going to set up a game of Risk for all of us to play while Katie was out, as the drive to the closest market was well over a couple of miles out. So Elijah and I sat poolside telling stories to each other about stupid stuff that happened while we were in college. And during our talk, I was staring out into the forest line, paranoid about the aforementioned wolves that Neil teased me about, and I saw something move. I couldn't tell since the porch light behind me was making it harder to see any details, but the way it moved made my heart jump. Elijah could see my body language change as I leaned in to see what was there. He started to ask me what I saw, and I replied with a wolf on a tree line. He looked towards where I pointed, and he calmed down. That's just Katie, dude. I think she was just trying to scare us. And so he started calling her name, waving his arm and laughing, saying how she scared the hell out of me. Neil came out of the house, wondering what Elijah was screaming about. Then he saw his sister standing in the field. He started to laugh when Elijah told him what happened and how I was on the edge of my seat. JD came out of the house next, and then Neil told him to help Katie with the bags and grab the fireworks. Katie, who was out in the field, started to wave back, but the wave definitely seemed out of place. It wasn't so much waving, but a sudden jerk, like if you were trying to pop your elbow. Elijah yelled for Katie to come back so we can start the party, but JD came back with a terrified look on his face. Katie's not back yet. I just called her. She's still on the road towards Walmart. And all of a sudden, everyone's laughing stopped. Elijah's face faded. His arm fell onto his lap with a thud. Everyone looked at the still, jerking figure in the field. Then she screamed. The scream was so loud, it sounded like it may have been just a couple of feet in front of us. All of us scrambled, running back into the house, slamming the door behind us. Neil shouted for all of us to lock the doors and to grab the shotgun in the living room. And so I ran to grab the shotgun, and it was the closest thing to us, while the other two ran to each of the doors leading outside. And so quickly I grabbed the shotgun, stuffed a couple of shells into my pocket, ran back to the kitchen where we came in from, and then handed the gun to Neil. I pulled out the shells, set him on the counter, and he loaded one in. JD came back nearly covered in sweat, freaking out, and he was shouting, "What the F was that?" Just as scared as he was, I looked at both of them. Elijah quickly joining us again, and he asked, "You don't think it's a skinwalker?" I read all the stories. I'd seen them all over 4chan and in creepypastas. And then JD reassured us, "No, it can't be. That was Katie. I'm sure she's just trying to scare us." And then Neil barked back at him to cut the BS. That scream wasn't human. You already called her. You told us she was still going out, coming back. And so he turned back to the door, pushing the blind slightly to find that quote-unquote Katie was now closer to us. It stood at the gates of the pool, illuminated by the light and revealing to us something that didn't look much like Katie at all. The hair was a mess, and the clothes looked tattered. Her skin was bruised. The one thing that caught our eye the most was her face. The head was tilted like it struggled to support the weight. The eyes were blank with emotion, and the jaw was agape. It raised an arm, jerking like it did before, in a mock wave. The jerking, however, started to get more violent, and the entire body started to shake uncontrollably. And so Neil quickly closed the curtains and backed off. He ordered us to sit back behind the counter, and he set himself in the gap leading to the kitchen, gun aimed at the door. It was silent for what felt like an hour. The three of us continued to look at Neil, who was completely focused on the door. A massive, grotesque smell entered our noses, and then all of us reacted appropriately. This horrid stench was like if you left groceries to ferment in the box in the summer heat with a couple of carcasses as garnish. It was definitely hard to breathe, tasting the smell in the back of your throat, even with your nose pinched. It was so bad, JD actually ended throwing up. Then, without any warning, the smell was gone. The hot air that was the smell went away, and it was easier to breathe. I was afraid to let go of my nose, but were rewarded with a breath of fresh air. Everyone took a couple of breaths to rid their lungs of this pungent smell that lingered beforehand. Neil asked us if we were okay, and we all replied, JD being an exception since he just puked. We heard what sounded like a whine. It sounded like a mix between a dog and a child about to cry. It wasn't coming from the porch door, but from the front, where we came in from the car. And so all of us stood up, Neil moving forward while we stayed back, and so we knelt down by the stairs, still hearing this whining. It didn't hit me until we positioned ourselves, but it sounded like someone was trying to talk for the first time, like an animal. In a raspy but still high-pitched voice, I could make out a very small portion of what it was saying. It kept repeating this word, and it's weird to pronounce this word, Zfruck, what? Something like that, until it started to sound more enunciated, more human. And so we were stating, what the F was that? It sounded like JD, same accent, same speech pattern, same voice. It was mimicking his voice. JD started to shiver. His breath was getting shallow. He shouted back in a scared voice I've never heard come from his mouth until now. Get out. Leave us alone. Get the F out. And then it said, leave us alone. Get out. The last words that we heard were in the same scream we heard when we saw it initially. It now started to pound on the door, not like it was trying to force itself in, but like an impatient knock. It started to scream in the same pitch we heard when we initially saw it. Get out, get out, get out. It terrified all of us. The inhuman screams, the polite pounding on the door. I started crying. I thought this was it. Neil wasn't scared like us. He was right pissed. He stood up, storming towards the door, screaming. He swung open the door, pointing his gun at whatever was on the other side, pulling the trigger, filling all of our ears, or filling all our ears with the sound of the shotgun blast and ringing to follow. And so Neil stood at the door, huffing. His body language was wanting to rip this thing apart. I stood up, looked past his arm, seeing nothing but a shell on the ground, and I looked up past his shoulders, seeing nothing but the driveway and the road leading back to where we came from. He turned around, and the adrenaline fading away and a shaking voice coming from his mouth. We're not staying here. JD called Katie. Tell her to get ready to go back home when she comes back. The rest of the time, all of us were in the kitchen. The shotgun sat on the counter with several shells near the butt of the gun. None of us wanted to say anything. None of us wanted to look at each other. It was nothing but silence until Katie called us. Neil quickly wrote a note, leaving it on the gun as we left. All of us hopped into the car, silent. Katie noticed our behavior, constantly egged us to tell her what happened. She pouted and put music on her radio to cheer us up. Only thing I could hear was that blood-curdling scream telling us to get out. And then that was it. That was everything associated with this very long, but again, scary story. Here we have a situation where it's in Texas. Again, something like that I mentioned in about one or two more videos. It looks like Texas has skinwalkers, everybody. So if you live in Texas like I do, watch out, especially when it comes to those foresty areas. And it's out there in the far remote area. That point there about having to drive 40-mile drive to go to grandma's house. One interesting about Texas that people mention when they move out here is how long the drives are. To us here in Texas, it's fine. Like a 40-mile drive is nothing. Like it's how it is out here. You could drive 5 hours each way. and you're still not crossing most of the state. So a 40-mile drive is just nothing from getting to point A to point B. But man, finding that wolf that was out there, or at least the tales associated with the wolf, and then it turning into mimicking something along the lines of their friend Katie. Wow, what a scary encounter, right? Here you had this thing mimicking Katie, but in a freaky Silent Hill way. There you have it, like jerking, motioning, moving its arm almost as if it was zombie, for lack of a better word, like if it's trying to bring something inanimated up to life and then it's failing at it, but it still looks pretty freaky. And then there it was, letting out that blood curdling scream that made them run back into the house. What a scary encounter that was there. No kidding, whenever they were able to stay there as long as they could in that house, with the kitchen pointing, like pretty much in the kitchen area, with the shotgun pointing towards the door of whatever this thing was as it was inching towards them. And then finally knocking on the door politely, if you could even call it that, telling them to get out, mimicking their voice once again. Crazy stuff. I'm interested to hear if the grandparents who lived there ever had any kind of encounter with this thing either. I mean, the fact that these people were there just on a one-off occasion and they ran into it, one would wonder what happens with the grandparents that were living there full time. Surely they would have seen something along these lines there, especially when it comes to being near that foresty area, whatever that is. Whoever that girl was, Katie, too, what a way to miss out on all these things and not encounter it, but it was very lucky on her part there. What do you guys think about this really scary story? Freaky stuff, probably one of those scariest ones I've talked about here. And now let's talk about the last one. This one is a little bit shorter, but sweet. And here's what this user has to state. I was told this story once. My dad isn't a bull esser or a liar, so I know the story is true. So this was the very early 80s. And my sister, who lived in Toronto, came down to visit our parents for a weekend. She was staying at a friend's house who loaned her a car so she could come out. After her visit, she left a little after 9. She got maybe 7 or 8 miles away when the car broke down. Thankfully, she broke down in front of a friend of the family's house. And so they let her in to call Dad, and then Dad came to get her. The family said she could leave the car in her driveway for their night, and my sister decided to just stay at my parents' for the night. And so it was now a little after 10 and pitch black, this being late November, while my sister and Dad are driving back to the house, and they pass through a heavily wooded area. Out of nowhere, they hear this incredibly effing loud, inhuman scream that was heard over the engine, them talking and the radio all at once. Dad slammed on the brakes and they both started freaking out when all of a sudden a 6-foot tall coyote walking on 2 legs with a black and white striped tail appeared on the side of the road and proceeded to walk in front of the car. And then as soon as it passed, that same screen played again, only this time 10 times louder. And so Dad slammed on the accelerator and they got the F out of there. It was never seen again. And then that's it. That's pretty much it with regards to this story here. Unfortunately, no indication of where this story took place. Like, was it here in the U.S. or was it somewhere else? The fact that the sister who lived in Toronto came down gives you an idea that it wasn't in Toronto. It must have been somewhere else. But the fact that, once again, this took place in an isolated area at night, wooded foresty location, and then they had this encounter with this very tall, 6-foot tall coyote walking in front of them. What a way to go. What it was doing, like when it comes to its scream, maybe it just wanted to truly scare them, which it worked, or maybe it's just wanting to make sure it wasn't going to get run over. Who knows? But either way, though, it definitely made them stop when it came to the brakes. And then they heard it again after they were leaving, and then they got the hell out of there, which I would do so too. I'm wondering again if this location, whatever this nameless location is prone to other skinwalker activities. But again, another link being it walking on 2 legs. That seems to be a common theme too, right? When it comes to skinwalkers, the fact that they involve dogs/coyotes, and the fact that they're always walking on 2 legs. But that's pretty much it. 3 scary, creepy encounters when it comes to skinwalkers. If anyone has any more info, something else I might have missed, then please post those comments below. And of course, I would always like to hear what your own stories are with regards to this. All right, everybody. Thanks again as always. Take care. Bye.